Welcome to the Edge of It All. I'm your host, Trey Edge, and I look forward to going on this journey with you. Each episode, I'll talk to guests of all walks of life, and I'll ask them the behind-the-scenes truths we all want to know. I'll reach out to newsmakers, celebrities, athletes, and ordinary individuals who were there during some of the biggest events of our time. Together, we will hear the story behind the story. So let's get started. This is the Edge of It All. Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of The Edge of It All, where you will get the story behind the story. Appreciate everybody joining us today on whatever avenue you have chosen to join The Edge of It All, whatever podcast stream you choose to use. We would hope that you would go to our home studio, UBN International Network. They've got a ton of other great podcasts along with The Edge of It All. Joining me today on the latest episode of The Edge of It All is a man who, quite frankly, is one of a kind. He is a legendary television writer, author. He's even a doctor of philosophy. His works include writing for the David Letterman Show, The Simpsons, Futurama, The Big Bang Theory. We could go on and on about his TV work. He has also written books, including Does Santa Exist? And he even hosts his own podcast. Please, everybody, welcome Eric Kaplan to The Edge of It All. Eric, thanks for being with us.
Hi, Jay. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Eric, we appreciate you taking the time. Just in that opening bio, a lot going on for you, always has been. So for you to take the time to discuss your career with us, tough to fit it in a little bit? You're always so busy.
Well, no, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure to connect with your fans, Trey, and with you yourself. So I would always find time for you and your fans, man.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. I wanted to ask you, your comedic writing talent. I wanted to go there first. Can you trace an origin to that? I mean, did you grow up, the class clown, the funny guy, or not? Because you've done such tremendous comedic work. Can you trace that back to a young age or not?
Yeah. My dad was very funny, and my dad was very deadpan. So you really need to keep on your toes, because he would be constantly saying like really funny stuff. I'm going to say stuff because I assume there's some kind of community standards here. He would say really funny stuff, and you'd have to figure out if he was trying to be funny. Like my grandma Doe would come over, and she'd be like, Ben, who invented air conditioning? And she'd be like, oh, I wonder who's calling me. That's not good. Yeah. So anyway, we don't need to talk to them. We're talking to the audience. They can go to voicemail. But my dad she'd be like, who invented air conditioning? And my dad would be like, I did, mother dear. And as a result, I am very wealthy. And I think I didn't hear anything that was not sarcastic until I was 16, 17 years old. Like everything was funny. And then my friend Andrew came to visit, and he was like, what's going on in your house? Everything is a joke. No one's ever serious. Everyone's sarcastic, but they're all doing it with these grim expressions on their faces. And when I say they're all, there's one exception who wasn't being funny ever, and that was my mom. But the rest of us were always being funny, and it just kind of soaked into my infant defenseless brain, Trey, before I had a chance to say yes or no. It had already happened.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you how much of that formed your style.
1,000,000,000%.
Yeah.
1,000,000,000%. And also, I grew up on the mean streets of Brooklyn, and everybody was some kind of a kooky underdog. Brooklyn had not yet made it to respectability. All the respectability was going on in Manhattan. We all had a chip on our shoulder, and we're a bunch of wise guys, honestly, and learning to trade jokes with, all my weird friends. That's another influence. So I'd say first my dad, and second my neighborhood. And then third, probably, TV, Monty Python and the Marx Brothers and that kind of stuff.
What's interesting about that is if you look at your career and all these incredible projects and shows that you've written for that soon, you advance yourself into writing books and things like that. Now that you describe it, it seems to fit.
Yeah.
Even the style, now that you explain that, I can look at some of these shows, whether it's, Writing for the Simpsons or the award-winning Big Bang Theory, things like that, and think, okay, well, that makes perfect sense now.
Yeah. I grew up in a group of sort of annoying outsiders, Trey, that like people who wanted to be included in the world and were ready to like take a bet to try and do it, but we didn't feel like we were part of the world. We were just like hanging on the street being no goodness.
You ultimately wind up at Harvard writing, correct me if I'm wrong here, writing for the Harvard Lampoon.
Yeah, it's true.
What role did that play? Because when people hear that, they hear Lampoon. They associate things with words. Was that an official kind of writing start for you?
Well, yeah. I had been doing some playwriting in high school, but like the first time I got like a check, so to speak. I don't mean to talk about money. Maybe people want to think about more fun things, but it's sort of meaningful.
It's all about money.
When you're a creative person and like someone actually writes you a check, it kind of gives you like a kind of a boost that you're like, really? I could make a joke and then I'm going to get a check and then I can exchange that check for a chocolate cake. Oh, that's pretty powerful. I didn't have a chocolate cake this morning. Now I do. And it's just because I made a joke. So one of the things that happened at the Harvard Lampoon, and like I was like not ready for Harvard. I didn't know how to use the knife and fork exactly. Mm-hmm. My mom dressed me really funny. Like she went out to these outlet malls kind of in the middle of Brooklyn where like they had never seen a person before. And I get one of those shirts that had like 3 stripes, like cream, rust, and like mustard. So I was not ready for the Ivy halls of Harvard, but I did get on the literary magazine, the Harvard Lampoon, and actually, so they needed to join, you needed to get a tux. So they took me out to get a tux, and like $100 tux, and I didn't know how to hem a tux, so I stapled it. I stapled the pants cuffs, and it so happened that one of the alums, this cat named Kurt Anderson, he was starting a magazine called Spy Magazine.
Oh yeah,
and he came and he's like, I want to get the guy who stapled his cuffs to be an intern. He seems like a real weirdo. So he did. So that was my first job. And it also came down to money because I was making $100 a week for Spy Magazine. And I was talking to my brother and he was like, you can make more money as a typist. You can make $11 an hour. And I'm like, that's more. So I went to the Graydon Carter. He went on to like run Vanity Fair. And I'm like, hey, $100 a month, that doesn't seem like a lot. And he's like, you can make more money digging graves. We're giving you a great opportunity. You should take it. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I got beat down by his superior negotiating ability.
What's interesting is, in looking back at your career and sharing those stories with us, even before...
I want the audience to understand, I'm not dead. I'm not retiring. Yes. The only direction to look at my career is not necessarily back. We could also look forward. Anyway, I was feeling a little insecure there. I want to put that on the table. But anyway, looking back on my career.
No, and we are going to absolutely talk about what you're doing now and what you're going to be doing. I just love going back and seeing these formations of how people come to be. And the whole thing about this show is the story behind the story.
Right. So you're sort of like a paleontologist. Like you want to be like, before it was a horse, it was this kind of weird dog with 3 toes. And then as the time passed, it got 2 toes, 1 toes. Now it's a horse. I don't mean to put words in your mouth.
I can honestly say I've been called a lot of things, never a paleontologist. So that's original. Before you got into professional writing, though, I want to just ask you about an experience in your life where you went to Thailand to teach English.
Oh, that's true, man.
Yeah, what made you do that? And
this is a wild story. So I was always into philosophy, and and I was reading philosophy ever since I was a little kid, like 11, 12. I was reading Descartes and Plato and Berkeley and Kant. So I was reading all these philosophers, and I even got not a job, but like I was an intern. No, I was a tour guide at this place called the Museum of Philosophy. But then somebody said to me once, hang on, why aren't you studying philosophy from other civilizations? Why are you only studying European philosophy? And I was like, yeah, that's a good question. How come I'm not studying philosophy from other civilizations? So when I was at Harvard, I said to the philosophy department, what if I get to study philosophy from other civilizations? And they said, no. So I'm like, okay. So then I went to the comparative religion department and I said, what if I study Western philosophy and Buddhist philosophy? And they said, come on over. That sounds fun. Do it. So I became a comparative religion major and my specialty was Buddhist philosophy. But wow. I was thinking, I really need to hang out with some actual Buddhists to know what this really means in practice. Otherwise, I'm like reading cookbooks and I'm never stepping into the kitchen. And that doesn't make any sense, does it? No. So I went and I became an English teacher in Thailand, and then I became a Buddhist monk because I was going to the local temple, and I met a guy who I really liked. His name was Pra Chalaw, and he was like, you know, if you really want to study Buddhist philosophy, why don't you become a monk? And I'm like, well, I don't want to I'm going to have kids someday. I don't want to be a tourist of your culture. And he's like, no, come on. Because in our culture, temporary monkhood is a thing. And they all do it. And they sort of feel like if you're a monk for a little bit, you'll be more likely to life can be tempting, Trey. You admit that, right?
Sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Life can be tempting, and you'll be more likely to not capsize the boat as the waves of lust and anger and ignorance barrel their way through your life if you have a little experience. So I became a Buddhist monk, and I was studying Buddhism in Thailand, and I think that's the answer to your question. I kind of got so entranced with the sound of my own voice, I forgot what the question was.
No, you answered it perfectly. And it all kind of ties together. You ultimately get into this professional writing thing. And, you know, we're talking about looking back. And I just want to pick a couple things, pick your brain really quick.
Please.
Because there's so many directions you can go. So many directions you can go with so many projects that you work on, so many successful shows that have become part of American, really, TV history, successful history.
Yeah.
But if I could ask you about, for example, writing for the David Letterman show.
Oh,
and I asked you about that show because it's near and dear to my heart. It was a time when I was growing up and I sat in a bedroom with a TV that could just get a few channels, and that's the one I could watch late night when my parents thought I was asleep.
They let you have a TV in your bedroom, man?
They just wanted to occupy me, man. That
okay,
was all there was
I feel like it would have been better if you'd have been out doing sports.
I did that during the day.
You did that during the day, and at night you were allowed to do TV. Okay. Everybody gets to have their own parenting philosophy. That's cool. I think it's a little bit too much TV to have it in the bedroom myself, but, you know.
Can you tell me just a little bit, what's that experience? What was it like writing for the Letterman show? Is there a fear that a joke's going to fall flat? Any of that kind of stuff when you're writing for? What was that experience like to write for a show like the David Letterman show?
Okay. Fear is a relevant emotion that you mentioned. Because we were on this contract where every 9 weeks, at the end of your 9-week, it was a 13-week cycle, but at the end of every 9 weeks, they could fire you. Mm-hmm. And they fired people a lot. So you'd be talking to somebody and hey, where's Danny? He was a lot of fun. Oh, he's gone. So And you know, the other thing is it's a daily show. So you write, and then at the end of the day, the next morning you come in and you're back at zero.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit like comedy boot camp, because also Dave was a very exacting boss. So he tended to say no 99.9% of the time. So almost everything you pitched him, he'd say no. And actually, when I first got there, everyone was doing this imitation of some guy who'd be like, no, God, no. I'm like, who are they imitating? But it was Dave, because that's what he was like when the cameras weren't running. No, God, no. Oh, God, no. So it was very difficult to get him to accept anything. But I got lucky, man, and I'm very happy. I'm very grateful to Dave. The very first day I got there, I pitched this joke for the mailbag where, like, they're asking Rupert G., who was the deli owner from Hong Kong out on the street.
I remember him well.
If he was happy or something like that. And it turns out in his fantasy, he wishes that he was running the show and Dave was the deli guy. And he says, put on this dog mask and dance for TV. And I had, by luck or destiny, come up with a good thing, which is that when Dave put on the dog mask, you could then swap him out with a dancer who was dressed the same, and he did this great dance. And you thought it was Dave wearing a dog mask, but, you know, paper moon hanging over a cardboard sky, right? It wasn't really Dave. It was a dancer wearing a dog mask. So I got to, and that's probably why I wasn't get fired that week, because I came up with that one. And it was a trip, man.
That's great. When I mention TV writing, okay, what is there a...
So of all the appliances in the home, the toaster, the fridge, the humidifier, the TV is one of the ones that most works with writing. If you try and be a toaster writer, you have a limited number of things you can write.
I would
imagine the toast pops out, the toast doesn't pop out. But when you have a TV to write for, there's so many more things you can do. So that's one of the things about TV writing that makes it really one of the best forms of appliance writing.
I love that. When I ask you, or when I bring up that subject, is there a show, a moment, an episode out of everything you've done, the nominated Big Bang Theory, nominated comedy, all of those things? I mean, come on, man. You wrote for The Simpsons. I mean, let's be real. You've written for some of the biggest shows ever. It's hard to pin this down to one thing, but when I say comedic TV writing and your works, is there anything that jumps out to you?
Well, you know, I really liked the episode of Futurama when Bender goes to robot hell. I liked that. I liked my episode of Flight of the Conchords a great deal. Big Bang, it's hard to pick out something that I have ownership over because it's a group-written show, but I'm proud of the you know, the body of work, like the characters that were created, because one of the things like there's art that comes in discrete chunks, and there's art that kind of becomes a change to your overall experience. So like a novel or a movie, it comes in a discrete chunk. But I sometimes think of TV as a little bit more like landscape architecture, where we live with these characters over a course of years, and we know that they're there, and we know that they're part of our life. So I think the achievement of a show like Big Bang is not so much any particular moment, but that these characters became real and emotionally involving to the audience over a period of years. So I'm very proud of that. I think that's quite a nifty trick, you know?
You mentioned we were looking back. Let's look current, and then I'll kind of link all of this together.
Great.
You go into philosophy. You mentioned that you read it at a young age, and you studied it. Is there a place where comedy and philosophy come together? Yeah.
Because what I'm trying to do is to be like a simple servant of reality and of people's encounter with reality. And I just want to be like, there's something we're trying to understand together. Can I bring it to you? Can I serve your heart? Can I serve your feelings? And that can come in all kind of different ways. It could come in a story. Sometimes people want a story. Sometimes people want to laugh. Sometimes people want to think. And I just want to be there and help bring that process to happen, like a midwife or something, right?
Yeah.
Like people go through their day and they're like, somebody was mean to me, but I was kind of a jerk back to them. I don't know what I think about that. And I would hope that they could look at a TV show that I wrote or read a book I wrote, and at the end of it be like, find some kind of like peace or joy with that experience and not be quite so confused and reactive and shamed. I want to heal shame.
It's an admirable notion. And tell me how your podcast, Terrifying Questions, plays into that.
Yeah.
Because
my podcast, I do it. It's a co-podcast with Taylor Carmen, who is a professor at Barnard in New York. And it's called Terrifying Questions and How Not to Be Terrified by Them. So we go through life, and life is very upsetting, perplexing even. Sometimes, honestly, it can even be off-putting. I'll use that word. And what we try to do is we try to each week take some question that could be terrifying or upsetting and off-putting and talk about it in a way that we're no longer terrified by it. And that can be a very abstract question like, is the self real? You know? Or it can be something more concrete like, are we doomed to be in these cycles of revenge? You know? Mm-hmm. Is enlightenment real? So we have all these questions. And we also sometimes have guests. And then we'll and that can be anybody from like a sex worker to an actor to a musician. And we will grapple with questions that they have some insight into, or it's a question that they have dealt with in their lives.
Well, those can be terrifying. I mean, they're absolutely terrifying questions because, in a sense, I mean, aren't we? And I'm not trying to jump on the philosophical bandwagon.
You're welcome on. There's plenty of room.
There you go. But I'm learning from you. So, in listening to you talk about it, it's almost like a search for those answers. And isn't that something each one of us, in some way, is trying to do every day? There's always
I
some
do
answer
believe
we're
that.
searching for.
I think that very often there are questions that we are faced with, and we can either stick our head in the sand or face them. So I don't know if everybody is trying to do it every day. But I do think they might be trying to do it, or perhaps trying not to do it.
Yeah, true. Do you remember like a first kind of existential crisis or question?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That you had?
I remember a big question for me was I was trying to imagine what it'll be like when I'm dead.
Wow.
And I would be like, I guess I won't be there anymore. And then I'm like, but I'm there observing the fact that I'm not there anymore. So I'm not going to be even there to observe it. And then I'd get very scared and I'd run and I'd hide underneath my parents' bed.
Huh.
So I do remember thinking about that.
So you were always questioning something.
I was a pretty curious cat. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that drives you to a place like a podcast, where I also want to get into books you've written. But it just seems like it's been an evolving career that's taken you to this place where what you're doing today in terms of using those search for answers and pairing it with, honestly, media platforms, be it writing, be it book, be it podcasts. It's an interesting choice of how you do that, correct?
Yeah. Well, I'm very platform agnostic because I just like to connect with people. And it's something I've even noticed, like you're talking about Thailand. I found that like if you're riding on a bus in the dark, the two topics that you could always kind of get people to talk about were like love and ghosts. You know,
Really?
did anyone in your village ever see a ghost? Do you believe in ghosts? Like, that's a real conversation opener. And then also, like, hey, how's it going with you and girls? Or, you know, like, those are two things that you can really start a conversation about.
I can imagine the love one. I can honestly say I've never heard. I may have to try.
You try it next time you're with somebody that you never met before. Is like, what do you think about ghosts? Do you think they're real? Do you ever know anyone who encountered something unexplained? It's a real conversation starter. So, like, I like starting conversations with people, and I find that philosophy is a great way to do it because there's no preconceptions if you're doing it right. If you're doing it right, it's sort of like, what do you think happens after we die? Do you think forgiveness is possible? Do you think love is selfish? Like, all that kind of stuff, everybody is qualified to talk about. Nobody knows the answer. So it's a way of having some kind of human connection. So I like to do that on the computer, on the podcast, on the TV set, you know, not the toaster because we already discussed it's kind of limited, you know.
Yeah,
that's more
limited.
for lunch.
Yeah, especially if it's burnt. The podcast, how many episodes have you done?
We done about 35, 40.
35?
Yeah,
and
we do one every
it?
week, although this morning we did 2.
Okay, so you've already done 2.
We did 2. Yeah, this is my 3rd podcast today. Isn't that wild?
That is amazing, and I'm thankful that the voice is left.
I think I might have earned a snack.
Where can we find your podcast?
You can find my podcast wherever fine podcasts are distributed. Okay. There's also a website called terrifyingquestions.com. But if you go to like Spotify or what have you, or I think Apple Podcasts, you can find it. It's called terrifyingquestions.com. And I don't know, people enjoy it. You might enjoy it. I mean, the audience listening to this, like, we kind of know that they like listening to podcasts, right? Otherwise, what are they doing? Is someone forcing them? No, it's a choice.
I want to take you. Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Where do you go from here? You mentioned you're doing the podcast, but when you think, or is it something you don't plan?
Well, Ed is a good question because my show, Young Sheldon, just announced that it's reached its final season.
Okay.
So that means
incredible show, by the way.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
So that means I need to make myself open to whatever forms of distribution and collaboration are out there to do something. And I think, like, the sort of main things that I got my eye on are an animated show, a half-hour comedy, an hour-long comedy drama, and a book. So I'm sort of sending feelers out in those areas. And just one of the things about Hollywood, it's a little bit of a business of buying lottery tickets because most things don't happen. So I want to have like 4 things that I'm really, really proud of in the hopes that like one of them will get on the air. And if 4 of them get on the air, it's a good problem to have, man.
Absolutely. Yeah. You mentioned books.
Yeah.
And you wrote the book, Does Santa Exist? I'm just citing that as an example.
Yeah, I brought a copy because I was asked to do so.
Show it to everybody.
Yeah, here it is. This is the book, Does Santa Exist? A philosophical investigation. And it's available on the internet. And if you like this kind of thing, you should read it because you'll like it.
What I want to ask you, it's a very simplistic question from my side.
Yeah.
But already talking to you, we know things have deeper meaning, and we know everything you do has a philosophical bent to it. And a comedic bent, sure, but there's more to it than that. So when someone looks at the book and says, Does Santa exist? On its face, it seems like a very simple subject matter. You know, he does or he doesn't. You believe it or you don't. But what was your goal in writing the book, and what is it you want people to take away from it?
Yeah, the goal was sort of writing about, like, the question, does God exist, in a way that wouldn't make people mad.
Okay.
Because I think there are these very deep, important questions about life, and people tend to get mad about them and to sort of end up engaged in some kind of a holy war. You know, the people who believe in God versus the atheists. And I really strongly believe that both sides are right. So it's a way for me to kind of lower the anger, kind of lower the anger level, so that people can have a conversation about how certain ideas can be a part of our lives and have limitations, but still be important to us. So that's what I'm talking about with Santa. But I mean, honestly, it could be almost about any idea or belief that you're both drawn to and not drawn to, like love or democracy. There's all these things that when we think of what we feel about them, we love them, but we're afraid of them. We like, that sounds great. I'm not sure if it's true. So it's about these, the role of paradox in our belief systems, man.
Yeah. People are,
but it's got jokes in it. It's got cartoons. You know, it's not just full of me on a soapbox lecturing you about paradoxes.
No, and that's what I wanted to bring up about it.
It's pretty fun.
Yeah, I read reviews of it.
What?
And I read reviews of the book.
Oh.
And some of the reviews I read, absolutely, you read my mind there, had to do with the fact some people called it one of the funniest books they've ever read.
Cool.
So I didn't want people to get the wrong idea that it was just, somebody preaching to them about.
No, it's not a lot of preaching. It's not a lot of lecturing. Yeah. I despise that.
But it's fun. And somehow comedy always works its way into even a philosophy discussion.
Yeah.
And I would ask you, is that a tool, a conscious tool, or is it an unconscious tool to put people more at ease with the conversation?
Oh, I think it's a way to put people at ease with the conversation. And it's also a way to kind of let in different perspectives, because I think comedy kind of lets you see both sides of life in a way that maybe like when we're in like a more strict like school way, we're like, I need to get all the answers. But then it's like, can you make a sandwich out of a piano? Like you might say, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You cannot make a sandwich out of a piano. Ham, sure. Bologna, absolutely. Piano, no. But then I'll say, what if you're a termite? What if you eat wood? Then maybe you could make a sandwich out of a piano. So then you ask this question, can you make a sandwich out of a piano? The straight answer is no. But the funny answer is maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I love it. And that's, I think, in looking at everything you've done, it's coming from, it's a joke at times. It's a philosophy at times. It's coming at it from just a different viewpoint.
Yeah.
And I think if I had to describe you to other people doing this interview,
or pick me out of a lineup,
that's what I would say. And I think, is that something you can take pride in? Because everybody has goals here. And you mentioned what your goals were. You wanted to bring something to people. But there's something tangible that you also want to touch. You just mentioned young Sheldon and what you're going to do with that in the next projects. You still want to be successful.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I have this this sick need for validation. So I would like a lot of people to be like, that was good. That was meaningful to me. That changed my life. Yeah, I enjoy that. I don't necessarily think I would be happy if I just stayed in a cave all day long and meditated. I mean, maybe I would. All right, you convinced me, Trey. Bye. No.
Well, no, the solitude of that would be good at times.
Right.
What
are you doing in a cave? I went on this podcast with this dude, Trey, and he kept lambasting me for being too into validation. And I was like, okay, you're right. And I've been in a cave ever since.
I drove him into darkness. Yeah. Something for me to be proud of.
No, I love caves. I do love caves. But, it's hard to have a career if you don't leave your cave.
So much of what you've done is in the public square.
Yeah.
successful TV shows, books.
Right.
Now you're doing
the
a
secret
podcast.
stuff I've done, you don't know about.
That's exactly right. And that's where my next question was. Tell the audience
The secrets?
something. It doesn't have to be a secret, but just tell us something we don't know about Eric Kaplan. It could be something he loves doing. It's past something we just don't know might surprise us. It is the story behind the story, Eric.
Oh, it's the story behind the story.
Get to know you. Or do we know it all?
You might know too much.
That is true.
No, I'll tell you something. What should I tell you? Oh, okay. I'll tell you something. I'm very interested in going to Cameroon.
Okay.
And working with the Baka people there, who are also known as the Pygmies, in order to learn their stories. And then I want to take those stories and make cartoons out of the stories, and then take the money and send it back to the communities of the people in Cameroon.
Incredible.
Because one of the things that I was thinking was, so I took this trip to Peru, and I learned that there were a whole bunch of different kinds of potatoes that were quite delicious and different sizes and different colors. And we only have one kind of potato. And the reason we have that kind of potato is not because it's the most delicious, but because it's the easiest to store and to transport. And I thought,
learned something today.
Is it not also the case with stories, that a handful of stories from Northern Europe, you know, Snow White, stuff like that, got picked up by the Walt Disney Corporation and spread around the globe. But there's all these other stories from other communities with other lessons.
Yeah.
I want those stories to get out there, and that's the thing people don't know, that I want to go to Cameroon and work with the Baka people and share their stories through the medium of animation. And then if that gets off the ground, I want to try it in other communities, like both geographically distant ones, but even like the stories of people who work in the Amazon warehouse,
Sure.
you know, like just talk with them about their stories, turn those into cartoons and get them out there. Because I feel stories are almost like they're us as a community trying to make sense of our lives. And we need more of them, and we need them coming from different perspectives, not just this top-down distribution that we get from Hollywood.
Well, when you do that,
Yeah.
I want you to come back on and tell us all about that and how that is going. I've got one final question.
Okay.
Okay. What philosophy or advice would you give to young writers today?
Well, the philosophy I would give to young writers today is twofold. One is, find the thing in your life that's bugging you and that you don't quite understand, and write from your need to get your arms around that.
Fantastic.
And then the other thing I would say is, whatever kind of person you find you cannot sympathize with or you cannot write from their point of view, start meeting that kind of person and writing from their point of view. Stretch your empathy muscle. So it's two pieces of advice.
That is fantastic. And you have certainly done that. And look, we could talk for hours. I'd love to have you back on. You know, it also strikes me when you told me, and I'll close with this, when you talked about going to Cameroon, we talk about philosophy, we've talked about comedy, what you're doing on the podcast. It just seems like it's an effort to always keep learning. Is that fair?
Yeah. I'm always learning. I'm always like for me to have Amazon in my house is like having a slot machine. Like I'm always wasting money buying books.
Love it. Where do you want people to go see what you're doing? Tune in. We mentioned the podcast. They can go see the pod. You know.
Well, I think that's the main thing right now. Go and listen to the podcast. And then obviously put a Google alert on your phone for Eric Kaplan so you're constantly going to learn if I'm doing anything new. But right now, it's the podcast.
The podcast. And if we could have one final thought for our audience from Eric Kaplan today, what would that be?
From me, not quoting anybody else, just from me.
Just from you.
I think... Yeah, if you will find, if you figure out any way to lower your defensiveness, that the world goes from black and white to color, because it's our defensiveness that makes the world seem less beautiful. So if you can lower your defensiveness, suddenly people, animals, plants, weather, it just comes alive in a beautiful way.
We should put that in a frame somewhere. Just frame that saying. Eric Kaplan, right at the bottom.
Yeah.
Eric, we
put that in the Trey Edge shop.
We can do that.
Yeah.
It's a small shop, plenty of room for it though. Eric, we appreciate you, man. And listen, everybody who's listening, go watch these shows that Eric has worked on. You know, we've mentioned them all. Just Google him; it'll all come up. Big Bang, Young Sheldon. Mention Futurama.
Oh, Drinky Crow Show. Look at the Drinky Crow Show, people.
Do that too. And just get a good laugh. And if you want to get his books, Does Santa Exist? If you want to dive into the mind, if you dare, of Eric Kaplan, do all of that. Listen to his podcast. Again, Terrifying Questions, the title of it. You know, just support Eric. It's a unique mind. And Eric, congratulations on what has been just an unbelievably successful career that has not just been funny, but has lent itself to a lot of laughter, a lot of happiness, and a lot of deep thought as well in American homes. We appreciate your time today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. And audience, thanks for your time as well.
Thank you, Eric. That'll wrap it up for this episode of The Edge of It All. Be sure to listen to us on UBN Go International Network or wherever you like to go listen to your podcast. You can find us there, like Eric said, Spotify, Apple, iHeart, you name it. We're there. We're even on YouTube. We're also all across social media. Please like, follow, and subscribe. Thanks again to Eric Kaplan for coming on the show today, sharing his story and the incredible ride that his career has been and will continue to be. Thank you to everyone for listening to The Edge of It All, the story behind the story. Each episode, a new story with inside scoop you have never heard before. Till next time, everybody.